requirements. Yes, Canada applies vigorous human rights criteria when issuing permits. That is not in dispute. The structural issue is that most conventional arms export to the United States requires no permit at all. That means no individual risk assessments and no comprehensive reporting. Annual reports tabled since 1990s do not capture the majority of U.S.-bound transfers because those exports are exempt from permits. A reporting framework cannot be considered complete when most of the exports fall outside of its scope. We're told that the U.S. exemption is not a loophole. It reflects a long-standing bilateral defense relationship. Yes, but its practical effect is that most conventional weapons exports to the United States proceed without permit, without assessment, and without detailed transparency. This is by definition a regulatory gap. Canada and the United States do not apply identical.
Hi folks, MP Garnet Genis here. We are getting ready for an important debate taking place in the House of Commons starting in about 10 minutes. Now, just to give you a bit of a window into what life is like as an MP. So I was taking the overnight flight from Edmonton, from my constituency, just outside Edmonton, along with my friend and partner in crime here, Arnold Viersen, MP for Peace River Westlock. So we usually take the red-eye flights together from our riding so we can have that extra few minutes with our families on Sundays, but also be here bright and early to work on Monday morning in Ottawa. But it sometimes happens, flight delays, mechanical issues, promises of on-time departure met with about as much consistency as promises from the Liberal government, Arnold? So here we are, a little bit late. We are rushing to Parliament Hill, getting ready to join the debate. We'll probably be there just as it's starting. So what is the debate here? At 12 o'clock, Parliament is going to be debating a Liberal motion to shut down committee considerations of Bill C-9. So this is a rarely used maneuver where the House of Commons can pass a motion requiring the committee to basically end debate. And their motion is very draconian. It would involve no further debate on any amendments, just sequential voting, basically forcing the C-9 issue to be finished, forcing an end to the discussion of this important bill. Bill C-9 is this bill that would raise serious problems for freedom of speech and freedom of religion by removing the religious defense so that someone could be charged with hate speech simply by reading or quoting from a passage of scripture. So I know many of you have been very concerned about this whole issue, and the debate is moving to Parliament in the sense that not committee but the House of Commons is debating this motion. Arnold, what are your thoughts? We don't see this very often, do we? This motion, the House ordering an end to debate at committee.
Yeah. And this is also the first time that the Liberals will be using closure in the House of Commons as well, which is
in this Parliament, yeah.
In this Parliament where they've got the support of the Bloc. So in the past, they've had the support of the NDP to do closure. This is, I think, one of the very first times that the Bloc is moving closure. So recommend folks get on the phone and contact Liberal MPs across the country saying that this is undemocratic and to oppose this for sure.
Yeah. So if you've got a local MP who's Liberal, but frankly, any MP, it's good for Conservatives to hear affirmation of our position from their constituents. We're going to be opposing this Liberal motion to shut down debate on their ironically shutting down debate on a censorship bill, right? And so they've made this deal with the Bloc to remove the religious defense, which raises all kinds of issues for freedom of speech, freedom of religion. They've removed that. They're trying to do that at the committee stage. And we've been kind of continuing the discussion at committee, and a lot of people have been concerned about this. Liberals have had enough, though. They don't want to hear from members of Parliament anymore, which is why they're trying to pass this to shut this down. And I totally agree, Arnold. Get people to contact. People should contact their members of Parliament on this. So that debate is going to be starting in the House of Commons. I think now we're about 5 minutes away from it starting. So to give you a sense of kind of the flow of the day, on Mondays, the House of Commons opens at 11. The first hour is on private members' business. So you would have seen debate on Jenny Kwan's private members' bill on arms control. So that is a different issue. That's a private members' bill debate. But that debate will end at noon Ottawa time, so in about 5 minutes, at which time the House of Commons is expected to immediately begin debate on this Liberal motion. And I suspect that the way it will start is you'll see a speech from a Liberal minister or parliamentary secretary. That Liberal will kind of make their case for why they are proposing shutting down this debate, and then that will move into there'll be a Conservative speaker next who will make our case against it, and then the debate will continue for a couple of hours, and we're expecting then a full day of debate on this Liberal motion tomorrow. But then also the Liberals will bring in closure, so the vote on this motion will be tomorrow night. So the vote on this Liberal motion to shut down debate will be tomorrow night, we expect, and then that will basically force the committee to vote rapidly on all the remaining issues with C-9. And if the Liberals succeed, if they get the votes to do this, then C-9 would likely be adopted by the House and sent off to the Senate, not this week, but the week after next week. So to give you a bit of a sense of the timeline. So we're really on crunch time now in terms of folks getting active on this. So a few things you can do. Number one, share this stream. We're going to be continuing live streaming the debate in the House of Commons once that starts. That will, again, I guess we're about 2 or 3 minutes away at this point. We'll be carrying that for the full 2 hours today, and we'll be live streaming the discussion again tomorrow. So please share this stream. You can follow on the various platforms so that you receive the updates. But do please use the moment now to contact your member of parliament and encourage them to vote against this effort to shut down debate. Arnold, any final thoughts from you here?
Yeah, just to be clear for everybody that Conservatives, we don't have the votes to stop this. So our anticipation is that this is going forward. Our only abilities is to debate this out and keep it going as long as possible. It looks like the bloc is going to play ball with the Liberals to force this through.
Yeah, we always hope that there's a few Liberal votes that flip, right? So if you've got a relationship with or even if you don't, calling your local MP. We've heard rumblings that there are some Liberals that are not happy with this, but it's easy for them to rumble. The rubber will hit the road when they have a chance to vote. So that's the hope here. Obviously, there's not enough Conservatives to win the vote. The question is if there are other members of Parliament from other parties who decide that, hey, shutting down debate on a bill to restrict freedom of religion, freedom of speech is not appropriate. So we're going to go back to the House of Commons now. Debate on the private members bill has ended, so the House will be suspended for a couple minutes. So you'll see that the House is suspended for a couple minutes, and then when that suspension ends, which I think we're probably only another 2 minutes or so, then we'll go into this debate on the Liberal motion to shut down debate on C-9. Again, please share this and follow for these regular updates, and we'll cut in a few times as the debate is unfolding to give you some added context, but we'll go now to the debate.
Government orders, government business, beginning debate, consideration of government motion number 6, proceedings on Bill C-9, an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places.
Mr. Longford, Mr. McKinnon, seconded by Mr. Solomon, moves that notwithstanding any standing order or usual practice of the House, Bill C-9, an act to amend the criminal code, hate propaganda, hate crime, and access to religious or cultural places, be disposed of as follows. A.
It be an instruction to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights that during its consideration of the bill, 1. The committee shall have the first priority for the use of House resources for committee meetings. 2. At the next meeting of the committee, following the adoption of this order, the committee shall immediately resume clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, whereupon all remaining amendments submitted to the committee shall be deemed moved. The chair shall put the question forthwith and successively, without further debate, on all remaining clauses and proposed amendments and sub-amendments, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, and the committee shall not adjourn until it has disposed of the bill.
Que toutes les questions.
Désolé. 3. The chair shall report the bill to the House no later than 2 sitting days after the completion of clause-by-clause consideration. B. The bill may be taken up at report stage last sitting of the House following the completion of the provisions of subparagraph A3 of this order. C. Au plus.
C. Not more than one sitting day shall be allotted to the consideration of the bill at report stage, and 15 minutes before the expiry of the time provided for government orders that day, or when no member wishes to speak, whichever is earlier. Any proceedings before the House shall be interrupted, and in turn every question necessary for the disposal of the said stage of the bill shall be put forthwith and successively, without further debate or amendment, and if a recorded division is requested, it shall not be deferred, except pursuant to Standing Order 7618. And
Then one sitting day shall be allotted to the consideration of the bill at third reading stage, and 15 minutes before the expiry of the time provided for government order that day, or when no member wishes to speak, whichever is earlier, any proceedings before the House shall be interrupted, and in turn, every question necessary for the disposal of said stage of the bill shall be put forthwith and successfully, without further debate or amendment, and if a recorded division is requested, it shall not be deferred. Debate. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, partisan politics is failing our most vulnerable communities. Partisan politics is failing our response to hate-motivated crimes and violence in this country. And when partisan politics prevents parliaments from acting to protect Canadians, then partisan politics is failing Canada itself. The motion before us today is a response to that failure. Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, was introduced by the Minister of Justice on September 19, 2025, and was referred to the Justice Committee on October 1st, 2025. Today is March 9th, 2026, and nearly 6 months, Madam Speaker, has passed since the bill's introduction. Since then, this House has debated the bill and the Justice Committee has studied it. Well over 30 witnesses have appeared and testified. Communities have spoken, both in person and via briefs, and amendments have been discussed amongst committee members. Parliament has done its job of scrutiny for this 8 pages bill, but there comes a moment when scrutiny must lead to a decision. After half a year of debate and study, the time has come for Parliament to act. The time has come to bring the Combating Hate Act to a vote. Yet the bill remains stalled, not because Canadians are uncertain about confronting hate, but because today's Conservative Party of Canada is divided on this issue. I say this with sincerity, Madam Speaker. When this bill finally comes to a vote, I believe many Conservative members will stand with us and support it. I believe that because many of them understand something fundamental, that Parliament has a duty to confront a specific form of violence that is rising in our communities, hate-motivated violence. Bill C-9 is not a complicated piece of legislation. In fact, it is only 8 pages long, but those 8 pages carry an important message that in Canada, hatred and intimidation have no place in our public lives. The bill does 3 straightforward things. 1, it creates offenses to stop people from blocking or intimidating others by trying to enter places such as synagogues, mosques, churches, schools, or community centers. Second, it creates a standalone hate-motivated offense so that when someone commits a crime of hatred towards a person's identity, the law recognizes that right from the start. And thirdly, it addresses the willful promotion of hatred through public display of hate or terrorist symbols used to target and intimidate vulnerable communities. Madam Speaker, I know that many Conservatives support these measures because they themselves called for them. In December 2024, the Standing Committee on Justice released its report on fighting anti-Semitism in Canada. That report, which was supported by the Conservatives, recommended measures that are now reflected in Bill C-9, defining hate more clearly, creating a standalone hate crime offense, and criminalizing intimidation directed at religious communities. That is why it is difficult for Canadians to understand what has happened ever since then. The Conservatives of 2024 called on Parliament to act. The Conservatives of 2026 are delaying the very measures they once supported. Canadians are left asking a simple question: which position reflects the Conservative Party's true position on the issue of hate crimes? But more importantly, Madam Speaker, this debate is not only about parliamentary process, it is also about Canadians themselves. In the last federal election, our party made a clear commitment to confront the rise of hate-motivated crime as it appears on page 19 of the 2025 Liberal platform. I will remind Conservatives that Canadians, including the people of Carleton, supported our platform to address hate crimes at the ballot box. They asked us to act, and Bill C-9 is part of fulfilling that promise. Madam Speaker, I have great respect for the role of the opposition. Opposition parties play a vital role in strengthening legislation. Their job is to challenge, to question, and even improve bills through committee work. But their job is not to paralyze Parliament simply because a bill creates internal divisions within their own caucus. Unfortunately, this is what Canadians have been witnessing. For example, the Conservative member of Elgin St. Thomas London South spent hours in committee speaking about issues that had absolutely nothing to do with the bill, including his admiration for cats and dogs, while witnesses, Madam Speaker, endured countless hours of filibustering and patiently waited to discuss this legislation designed to confront hate. The Conservative member of York Centre used valuable committee time talking about sandwiches he had for lunch instead of debating how Parliament should respond to threats that Jewish communities are facing in his own riding. This is not serious parliamentary work. Canadians expect so much better from all of us. Let me be clear. Our government has made every effort to constructively work with colleagues across the aisle. When concerns were raised by the Blue Québécois amendments proposed in committee might create uncertainty around the freedom of religion, we listened. We worked with colleagues to introduce a for greater certainty clause, making it absolutely clear that preaching, teaching one's faith, reading scripture, delivering sermons, praying, and discussing religious texts in good faith would never be criminalized by this legislation. Religious organizations from across the country, Madam Speaker, welcome that clarification. Groups such as the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the Canadian Hindu Alliance, and the Christian Legal Fellowship, pretty much all religious groups, expressed their satisfaction with this additional clause to Bill C-9 and are now waiting for it to move forward. In other words, when legitimate concerns are raised, we address them. This is how Parliament is supposed to work. But even after that collaborative effort, the obstruction has continued. Madam Speaker, Parliament has already spent more than 35 hours debating and studying this bill. Witnesses have testified. Amendments have been examined. Every clause has been reviewed. For a bill of 8 pages, that is thorough scrutiny by any reasonable standard. At some point, debate must give way to decision. Democracy does not function if legislation can be delayed indefinitely. The communities affected by hate cannot wait, however, while Parliament argues about procedure. That is why the motion before us is necessary. It simply ensures that the committee can complete its work and that this House can finally vote on Bill C-9. Let the legislation come to a vote. Let every member of this House make their position clear to Canadians. Those who support confronting hatred will stand up and vote for it. Those who oppose it will have to explain their choices to the communities who are asking for protection. Here's what's at play. Across this country, we have seen people at synagogues shot at mosques threatened, churches burnt, people at temples harassed, and children arriving at school with hateful or terrorist symbols waved outside their school gates. These are not isolated incidents. They are part of a troubling pattern that communities across Canada are experiencing. Law enforcement, community leaders, and human rights organizations have told Parliament clearly that the measure in Bill C-9 would give them stronger tools to address these threats. Madam Speaker, after 6 months of delay, it is time for Parliament to move forward. It is time to rise above partisan politics. It is time to listen to the voices of Canadians and to send a clear message that hatred and intimidation will never define our country. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Avant que l'on procède,
Before we proceed, I would like to note to the House what I neglected to read earlier in reading the motion in paragraph A2. I neglected to read so that it's clear the sentence that without further amendment, all remaining clauses of proposed amendments and sub-amendments as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause by clause.
I listened very carefully to my colleague across the room, and something that struck me was rather unique. She talked about how when the Bloc introduced this motion to remove a 50-year-old plus defense in the criminal code, that the Liberals listened, that the government listened, that she and other Liberal committee members listened. So I'm going to ask her right now whether or not she can identify which witnesses that were called to the committee on C-9, which witnesses were brought by this Liberal government to support the removal of the religious defense. Very simple question. I would like a simple answer.
the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Chair, we had many issues being discussed at committee, and I remember very clearly that when the Bloc Québécois in this House in second reading proposed the removal of such an exemption, my colleague who asked me the question said, and I quote, "Everything is on the table." And so therefore, everything was on the table at committee, and we disposed of that very same issue at committee.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de Lille. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It seems obvious to me that it was illogical that we could simply invoke a religious reason to incite to hate. So I think that it's a very good thing that they accepted the amendment. So I'd just like to know what my colleague has to add on that. Thank you. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. There was a debate at committee, as we do with any bill, and after having debated the bill and considered the religious exemption in that clause, all members of the Justice Committee voted in favor, which seemed to us to be the thing to do. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture said before the Justice Committee that there is, quote, clear hatred in some verses of the Bible and Torah, and that quoting these scriptures should invite discretion for prosecutors to, in his words, press charges. Does the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice agree or disagree?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we are here today discussing the process. The reason why we've presented this motion is because we at committee have been trying very seriously to get this bill studied and come to a conclusion, but we have been unable. As a matter of fact, the member who asked the question has done nothing but filibuster and obstruct the work of the committee, invoking his love of cats and dogs.
Oh my goodness. Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciated the comments that the member has put on the record in terms of why it's so important that Bill C-9 pass, and a bit of the frustration from the official opposition in the manner in which they feel that they have an absolute entitlement to be an instructive force inside the House of Commons, and indeed at times in standing committees. As the member has pointed out, this is an issue that was raised during the last federal election. It was indeed a ballot question, as she has put it. And my question to the member opposite, would she not agree, given the very nature of the issue, that it is indeed time for us to recognize that the Conservative Party seems to be more interested in the Conservative Party agenda, which in part includes fundraising on this issue, than it is in the public interest of Canada, and we can see that but through the filibustering they put forward in Bill C-9 of committee.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his question. Madam Speaker, we've seen a rise in incidents of anti-Semitism, including 2 shootings at synagogues just last week. It is literally a reminder that this bill needs to pass, and to pass quickly, and send a strong message to Canadians that hate crimes are heinous and must be denounced. That is why we are acting on Bill C-9, making it illegal to block or impede someone's access to their community or religious center, and creating a new standalone hate offense so that these crimes are treated seriously.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Beauharnois, Salaberry, Soulanges, Huntingdon. Madam Speaker, today we're debating a motion to limit debate. It's funny to say it, but on Bill C-9, because at committee, the religious right wing of the Conservative Party is blocking the committee's work because there's an amendment that was passed by the Liberals and the bloc on the religious exemption, which would remove the religious exemption from the criminal code. And Madam Speaker, what they're doing is, again, blocking the committee work. It's filibustering from the far right wing, and it doesn't make any sense. So we can't accept that hate is propagated through religion. Can the member please speak more to this issue? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Indeed, we have seen filibustering, as we see, as we say, for hours and hours and hours at committee, and we see that members of the Conservative Party are divided. There are some who are in favor of this bill, which is good legislation, and there are others who are against it. And unfortunately, Canadians are paying the price of that, because we're seeing incidents that need action. We need to move forward with this bill, which will protect Canadians. And that is why we've had to move forward in this way. And we are hopeful that this motion will pass the House of Commons so that members of the committee can continue their work. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Brantford, Brent South, Six Nations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hate to be the bearer of bad news to the Parliamentary Secretary, but early on in her intervention, she indicated that she has every confidence that every member of the Conservative Party of Canada would support the swift passage of Bill C-9. Well, that may be true in principle. We do not support the method by which they wish C-9 to move through the process. We do not support their ability to censor debate. And it's rather ironic that this member speaks about censoring debate under a censorship bill. I'm also aware that there is some deep divisions within the Liberal Party itself. The question to the Parliamentary Secretary is there an expectation that the party will whip the vote, or will they allow a free vote for those members who voice their displeasure with removing this religious defense?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, what is unacceptable is the hours and hours of filibustering and obstruction by the members at the Justice Committee not to move forward with this bill. Madam Speaker, it is also a shame to hear the member opposite talk about combating hate act as a censorship bill. What does the opposite member call censorship? Does he think it is okay to target synagogues? Does he think it is okay to threaten LGBTQ plus people because of who they love? Does he think that it is okay to willfully call for the extermination of women and radicalized Canadians while waving a Nazi flag in public? Madam Speaker, which form of hate is the member opposed trying to protect?
The Honourable Député de Mirabel.
The Honourable Member from Mirabel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, we're working on C-9, not so much on the essence of it, but more so on time allocation. The committee, on any amendment, on any clause, so long as Conservatives decide to keep speaking, well, basically, we can't keep working. They can read the phone book, the Testament, any book, and that can take a long time. I'd like the colleague to explain what happens if we don't go ahead with the motion today. A brief response from the parliamentary secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the colleague for his question. I feel like saying that we've witnessed a, shall I say, 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. session that was full of filibustering alone. It's an example of people reading absolutely anything from absolutely any book and things that have absolutely nothing to do with this bill. This is a tactic being used to stall and to not go ahead with this bill. It's absolutely essential for the House to pass this motion so that we can move forward and so that we can protect Canadians.
The honourable member, the honourable Parliament Secretary of State, yes, on a point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 111.1 and in accordance with subsection 79.1, paragraph 1 of the Parliament of Canada Act, I have the honour to table in both official languages the certificate of nomination with biographical notes for the proposed appointment of Annette Ryan as Parliamentary Budget Officer for a term of 7 years. I request that the nomination and biographical notes be referred to the Standing Committee on Finance. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Duly noted. Resuming debate, the honourable member for Brantford, Brant South, Six Nations.
Thank you and good morning, Madam Speaker. At the outset, I wish for unanimous consent to split my time with the member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
The honourable member have unanimous consent? Agreed. The honourable member.
It's absolutely a pleasure to always rise on behalf of the exceptional residents of my riding, and in addition to Canadian faith leaders and Canadians from coast to coast to coast who we have heard through emails, through telephone calls, through town halls, through stakeholder meetings, a whole litany of pieces of communication, that they are extremely disappointed with these Liberals and their attempt to challenge and to stifle freedom of religion and freedom of expression. Let me make something abundantly clear, Madam Speaker. Unlike the parliamentary secretary who wanted to frame a very false narrative to support what this Liberal government is doing with this closure debate, I'll make it abundantly clear. Conservatives will always support unequivocally in terms of supporting churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, and cultural centers from all forms of intimidation, obstruction, and violence. Hear, hear. Canadians of every faith must be able to gather and worship without fear from terrorists, from those individuals who would wish to intimidate, but more importantly, from the Liberal government. Today's debate is not about protecting places of worship, as the parliamentary secretary wishes to frame this. This debate is about a Liberal censorship motion designed to unequivocally shut down all forms of debate and ram through a controversial change to the criminal code. Now, it's very clear, Madam Speaker, that Canada has been witness to a deeply troubling surge in anti-Semitism, heightened by the October 7th, 2023 events and targeted violence against Jewish communities from coast to coast to coast. In recent days, sadly, there have been targeted shootings at Jewish places of worship in the GTA. In at least one incident, people were inside the synagogue at the time of the shooting. Jewish Canadians are increasingly feeling that their communities are under siege. There were a number of newspaper articles. I'm merely drawing attention to a few that I read yesterday and today. Today's headlines in the Toronto Sun: Jews under attack, anti-Semitism out of control. I'm aware as well of a social media post by Brene Brith, "Synagogues under attack. Enough words. Government must act now." There was another article that I read in the Toronto Sun that talked about the typical response that you get from all political leaders, but particularly this Liberal government, that anti-Semitism has no place in Canada. And the article made it abundantly clear. Jewish Canadians, members of all religious denominations and faiths who are facing intimidation and attacks, do not want hollow words from their political leaders. They want action. And the Jewish Canadians in particular have wanted action for almost 2.5 years, while these Liberals sat on their seats and did not address this rising level of anti-Semitism in a fashion worthy of a federal government. These attacks are not the result of a missing clause in the criminal code. They are a symptom of rising anti-Semitism that this Liberal government has failed to confront with clarity and strength. Let me be abundantly clear again, as I wish to be on this record to correct this parliamentary record. Bill C-9, if it were law today, would not have prevented the attacks that the GTA saw over the past weekend. Canadians need real leadership against anti-Semitism, not rushed legislation designed for political headlines. Now that we recall the House Leader talking about put up or shut up when we return to start our 2026 legislative calendar. I believe that phrase perfectly captures the government's approach to Parliament. Instead of answering legitimate questions about the bill or listening to concerns raised in committee, the government has chosen to shut down debate through this motion. This motion forces the Justice Committee to immediately resume clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, whereupon all remaining amendments submitted to the committee shall be deemed moved. And the chair would put every remaining question immediately without debate. Debate in the House would also be restricted. There would only be one sitting day at report stage and one sitting day at third reading. Votes are to be forced immediately after further debate. Now let me have this next phrase really sink in. I know the parliamentary secretary didn't like my choice of words, but I'm going to reference it again. This Liberal government is censoring debate on C-9 on its own censorship bill. Clause-by-clause consideration of this bill began on November 27, 2025. However, the study of the bill began earlier on October 9 of that same year. Since that time, committee held 8 meetings on C-9. Amendments were debated, amendments were adopted. Some amendments brought forward by Conservatives were even adopted by the committee as a whole. It's also important to understand how the government handled that process. 3 scheduled committee meetings on the bill were canceled without explanation. At least 2 meetings were gavelled out early, again without explanation. The reality is that this committee was engaged in active debate on the bill on the implications of removing the religious defense. In fact, during committee hearings, Liberal ministers themselves even raised questions about religious texts and the scope of the defense. The current Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, when he was the chair of the committee, stated the following, quote, "I want to dig a bit into the concept of good faith. In Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Romans, there are passages with clear hatred. I don't understand how the concept of good faith could be invoked if someone were literally invoking a passage from, in this case, the Bible, though that there are other religious texts that say the same thing. How do we somehow constitute this as being said in good faith? Clearly," he said, "there are situations in these texts where statements are hateful. They should not be used to invoke or be a defense." Now, here's the real interesting commentary by the minister and former chair. "There should perhaps be discretion for prosecutors to press charges. The moment that minister uttered those words at the Justice Committee, we received a flood of concerns right across this country because those words sent a chill down the spine of every religious leader in this country and those who practice their faith. This was and still is a direct attack by this Liberal government to attack freedom of expression and freedom of religion. They had no business at all making a side backroom deal in the middle of clause-by-clause consideration to support the block amendment when the clause-by-clause consideration was progressing very well. There was every expectation that we would have come to an agreement, save and accept this poisonous amendment by the Bloc Québécois. But no, the Liberal government chose this not because it was in Canada's best interests, not because it was in the best interests of religious leaders across this country, not to stop the rising levels of hatred, not to stop the attacks on the Jewish communities. They did this for their pure, selfish political reasons.
Hear, hear.
As I indicated, Madam Speaker, this was a 50-year-old defense entrenched in the criminal code, brought by Elliott Trudeau himself. It has been used sparingly, not successful, but that in of itself does not give license to this hypocritical Liberal government to remove it for political reasons. Now, they're basically, am I almost done? I'm almost done of time. So I will wrap anything. I'll look forward to questions, and I'll probably elaborate a little bit more in my responses. Thank you.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the reality is that there is no attack by this government on our faith communities. And you know what, Madam Speaker? Members of the opposition actually know that. But instead of reflecting reality, Madam Speaker, when we take a look at the amendment that was brought forward for a greater certainty, it provides assurances so that those faith communities can have a higher sense of being comfortable, in part because of misinformation that is constantly being pumped out by the Conservative Party of Canada. My question to the member is, does he not feel any obligation whatsoever, given that there was an election mandate on this issue in dealing with hate crime, that there is a responsibility of the official opposition to at least allow for debate to actually continue and come to an end so legislation can ultimately be passed by a majority?
Member for Brantford, Brent South Six Nations.
In typical Liberal, hypocritical fashion, they're making statements. Canadians, faith leaders, you've got nothing to worry about.
Nope.
Once we remove this religious defense. It's been around for 50 years. We're going to take it away from you, but don't worry. Your charter rights are still protected. Where did we hear that before? We heard that during the invocation of the Emergencies Act. It was charter compliant. We heard that from the Prime Minister. We heard that from ministers. We heard it from David Lametti, who very arrogantly told Justice Rouleau, I'm not going to give you my legal opinion. You just got to take my word for it that it was charter compliant. Well, you tell that to the Federal Court of Appeal and the Federal Court trial judge who came to a different conclusion. Canadians will not believe this Liberal government. And if they do, I've got a plot of swampland you can build a dream house on in Florida. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments, the Honourable Member. Order. The Honourable Member for Elgin, Elgin St. Thomas, London West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I noticed in the earlier intervention by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice that there was a lot of historical revisionism on what actually happened at the Justice Committee, specifically regarding the block amendment to remove the long-standing protections for religious speech. She indicated that there had been robust debate and that the committee heard what was at stake there. I'm wondering if my colleague, who is the vice chair of the Justice Committee, could speak to his recollection on how much the Liberal members actually intervened on that and how much testimony we got to hear from witnesses on that.
Member for Brantford, Brent, South Six Nations.
That was a fantastic question by my exceptional colleague. The simple answer for all those who have a fond recollection of some great comedy movies from the 1970s and 80s, the answer to my colleague's question is 0.0. A reference to Dean Warmer and Animal House. We heard from numerous witnesses, Madam Speaker. Not one Liberal committee member, including the parliamentary secretary, ever asked one question to support whether the removal of a 5-decade-long religious defense was appropriate at this point in time to deal with the rising levels of anti-Semitism. 0.0.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments?
Honourable member. Sorry. My God. The honourable member for Jesus. Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola.
Okay. It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola. I'm used to speakers knowing my riding, so I appreciate you refreshing getting my riding correct, Madam Speaker. To my colleague from Brantford Brant, the Liberals here, we've talked about historical revisionism and things like that, and the audacity of the parliamentary secretary from Winnipeg to say, don't worry, this is all fine. People have nothing to worry about. I've had faith leaders from my community of Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola come and speak to me about their concerns about this bill. Where you hear concerns is on the ground. Will the Liberals get out of their ivory towers and actually address these things, or are they just going to plow through with a bill that faith communities have serious concerns about? Thank you.
Honourable member for Brantford, Brent, South Six Nations, 10-15 seconds.
The Justice Minister promised Canadians that he was going to listen. He was going to embark on consultations. I know because my inbox is flooded with thousands and thousands of concerns. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians have written to Liberal MPs right across this country saying, back off on supporting this removal of the religious defense. They refuse to listen to Canadians, pure and simple.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a privilege, as always, to rise on behalf of the people of Elgin, St. Thomas, and London. I said in my maiden speech in the chamber that I came to Ottawa with the goal of making Canada a freer place. Indeed, one of the motivations I had for getting into politics was seeing how our fundamental freedoms, including, notably, the freedom of expression, was under threat, largely by a lot of policies we've seen and decisions we've seen from this Liberal government in the last few years. And it was in that spirit that I rose to the task of combating this very dangerous bill, C-9, from the get-go. When the Liberals put this forward, and I saw in the text of the bill language that will not be used to protect marginalized community, but will actually inflict harm on the very people the Liberals claim it will protect. Now, let me say first and foremost that hate is real. It is a scourge in society. I have seen the brazen anti-Semitism unleashed on Canadian streets since October 7th. London comprises a part of my riding. We saw 5 years ago the brutal slaying of the Afzal family, a Muslim family targeted by a man with hate and evil in his heart purely because of their faith. We have also seen 123 Christian churches burned or vandalized in the last 5 years. Actions that when Justin Trudeau, the former Liberal Prime Minister, was asked about them, he said they were, quote, understandable. Hate is real, and sometimes it can come from political leaders. But Bill C-9 was not an antidote to hate, a problem that was allowed to fester on the Liberal government's watch. Much of what Bill C-9 does, such as criminalizing obstruction to a house of worship or prohibiting the display of hate symbols, treads over ground that is already covered by existing laws that have been unenforced for the last several years because of a failure of political leadership by the Liberals. But then you look at what Bill C-9 actually does that changes things. It creates a new definition for hate, which every witness who testified before the Justice Committee said was lowering the threshold, making it easier to charge people for the words they say than is the case now. Removing critical safeguards against overzealous prosecution. And then, of course, you have the removal of the religious defense, removing long-standing religious safeguards for political speech, a decision that became especially significant when we looked at the transcripts of the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture's comments, that in his view, there is clear hatred living within holy texts that millions of people around this country read and cite and pray over from a place of love. But to the minister, he says there's clear hatred, and not only that, prosecutors should be able to, in his words, press charges against those who cite them. That is why all of the declarations and claims from Liberals that they will protect charter freedoms, they will protect freedom of expression, they will protect religious freedom, why all of those claims ring so hollow. Because they have been abundantly clear in their language that they do not protect that. They do not value the role that faith plays in society. And I want to give a perfect example of why the Liberals cannot be taken at their word that they will protect charter freedoms. The parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Justice said before committee, quote, "Freedom of religion is already fully protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms." She said that to assuage concerns that Bill C-9 would lead to the further erosion of these freedoms. Well, does it sound familiar to you, Madam Speaker? It should, because Justin Trudeau said something very similar when defending the invocation of the Emergencies Act. He says, "I want to reassure Canadians that when the Emergencies Act is invoked, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms continues to protect their individual rights." The federal court later determined that was a lie. The Federal Court of Appeal later affirmed that that was a lie. A government claim that it is protecting charter rights is not sufficient to actually protect those rights. And this is coming from a government that has a long history of censorship bills. And now on Bill C-9, when conservative members of the Justice Committee wanted to bring the testimony from people who are among the millions of Canadians of faith who will be directly affected by this, the Liberals have moved to the motion before us today to shut down debate. The Liberals are censoring debate on their censorship bill. The Liberals are denying us the opportunity to read letters from imams, pastors, rabbis, civil liberties advocates, individual Canadians who have been flooding members of Parliament's inboxes and voicemail boxes and phone lines with their concerns about Bill C-9. The denunciation of Bill C-9 has not come from some far-right conspiracy like some of the members in this chamber have alluded to today. It has come from the left and the right. It has come from the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, the Rabbinical Council of Toronto, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the United Church of Canada, the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, Egal Canada. We have groups representing almost every faith tradition in this country, civil liberties organizations, social justice organizations, all of whom believe that Bill C-9 will harm the very groups the Liberals claim it will protect. And why this is so fundamental, I go back to my comments in my maiden speech that freedom of expression has always been and will always be my hill to die on. There's a line from James Madison that comes to mind. "The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty." Put simply, if all other freedoms were stripped away, but the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, we would be able to use that fundamental liberty to fight back for all the others. Removing freedom of expression takes away a vital tool that Canadians have against an overzealous and authoritarian government. And it is fitting that the Liberals are laying their intentions out so barely, that they are prepared to censor the very debates and discussions we need to have in this chamber to justify legislation that will censor the thoughts and expressions of Canadians. The best remedy, even for offensive speech, is more speech, not enforced silence. The best antidote to someone abusing scriptures is the freedom for all Canadians to freely discuss and debate those scriptures and share their true intention, to read their holy texts and demonstrate that these texts come from a place of love. This lies at the heart of the guarantee of freedom of expression. Censorship is the confession of a society that it no longer trusts truth to win, that it no longer trusts people to be the arbiters of what should be discussed and debated and freely disseminated in society. When the state dictates what words can be uttered and what scripture verses can be read, it polices the ideas that can be shared and even what can be believed at a fundamental level by Canadians. In the absence of freedom of expression, there are only official lies. A society that fears words has already begun to fear thoughts themselves. And that is why the groundswell of opposition to Bill C-9 has been so robust. Freedom of expression was not enshrined in our charter to protect the easy or the popular. It was there precisely to protect the difficult and the unpopular. Those are the ideas, the sentiments, or some Liberal members need to be told, the scripture verses that need protection the most. So this is not, when we stand up for freedom of expression, a guarantee that every voice will be or should be welcomed. It's to say that no voice should be silenced because of the dictates of a state that wants to draw an arbitrary line on what constitutes hate to silence those it hates. And that is, to be perfectly frank, what is at stake today, Madam Speaker. The Liberals not only want to silence in our society certain viewpoints and ideas, and yes, people, but they want to silence those voices from even being heard in the legislative process. I will close on this. Freedom of expression is the covenant of a free people, that no idea is so dangerous it must be buried, and that no citizen so small that their voice must be denied the light. The Liberals may wish to be the arbiters of what we say and even what we think, but they do not have or deserve that license. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, through the issue of time, Canada has evolved and adhered to values that are envied around the world. And a part of that means that there have been legislative changes that have taken place, both at the national and the provincial level, because it is deemed based on a reflection of Canadian values. For example, hate-motivated assaults. They take place today in Canada, Madam Speaker. And I truly believe that the values that Canadians have reflect very negatively on that aspect of society. This legislation incorporates that particular value. Someone shouldn't be assaulted because of a particular faith that they might belong to. That makes it incorporated into legislation, Madam Speaker. Does the member oppose that?
Well, member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Not only do I not oppose it, but I'm very proud that it is already illegal and nothing in Bill C-9 changes that. Perhaps the member should spend less time, talking and more time reading the legislation he talks about.
Order. Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Beauharnois, Salaberry, Soulanges, Huntington.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Listen closely to my colleague's speech. What we are debating today is not necessarily the substantive aspects, but rather the process for the adoption of C-9. I know my colleague is a new member, and I admired his talent as an orator at the Public Safety Committee, where he was able to take up a great deal of time to filibuster when we were studying C-12. After 50 hours of debate, does he not believe that we can stop and move forward with the adoption of C-9? I know that the amendment about the religious exemption is not something he agrees with, but at a certain point, we need democracy to take its course. And today we want to speed things up because the Conservatives are causing filibustering.
St. Thomas, London South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'll choose to appreciate and thank my colleague for her compliment there. But the challenge is that while we have had some time at committee to look at Bill C-9, the most contentious part of it, the removal of the religious defense, had no witness testimony, has had no opportunity to freely discuss with the people most affected. And it is in that spirit that even our efforts to rectify this were met by denunciation from the Liberals, who on one end claimed cooperation and collaboration, but on the other hand slapped our hand away when we offered to give them a legislative safeguard that did what they claimed they wanted Bill C-9 to do. So when we are, as a committee, looking at a bill, we do not, as members of Parliament, have the moral or legal right to bargain away Canadians' fundamental rights and freedoms.
Questions and comments? The honourable member. Apologies for Sudbury East, Manitoulin, Nickel Belt. Nope.
Surrey Smooth Mountain.
Surrey Smooth Mountain, I'm sorry. Jeez.
My colleague for his wonderful speech, and he mentioned in his speech that this was a hill for him to die on. This is something he takes very seriously. I'm just wondering if he could expand on that and explain why our caucus and him personally feel so strongly about this matter.
The honourable member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
I'd actually like to share a quote, if I can, to respond to that. I didn't have time to include it in my speech. It's from John Stuart Mill in On Liberty. He writes, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind." We all, as free people, have the right to express who we are and express our values, and we respond to that with other values, with debates. We do not respond with censorship. Attitudes change over time. And indeed, slavery ended because of the religious convictions in the British Parliament of Wilberforce, a position that was unpopular but was morally correct, and history bears that out. Right. Only when we allow free speech do we have the opportunity for truth to win.
Here.
Resuming debate. The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to start by saying that I will be sharing my time with my distinguished colleague for Mirabel. And in a way, this is a preamble to my colleague's speech, because he says he's going to be particularly amusing today, Madam Speaker. I won't say any more. That's just a teaser. Also, before starting, there are a couple other things I would like to quickly mention. Things that greatly affected me this weekend and this morning. I'd like to offer my thoughts to the young cadet who died in a bus accident. I can barely imagine what his parents and loved ones are feeling. And also, just generally, the greater cadet community in Quebec. I know that they all are mourning today. And there was also something else that happened. In Drummondville, a woman was found dead in a residential area. And we don't have any context for what happened. But when things like that happen in a peaceful community, in a very close-knit community, well, the whole community is in turmoil because of this. And I'm thinking about all of these people who are affected. Okay, now we're almost at the end of this three-ring circus on C-9. We need to call a spade a spade. What we're seeing here is the manipulation of truth and facts. We're seeing disinformation. And we're seeing disinformation specifically to very cynical ends, dishonest ends, I would say. Madam Speaker, Let me just start by reminding the House what the Bloc Québécois wanted. I think it was very reasonable, given the nature of Bill C-9. First of all, we wanted to reestablish the consent of the Prosecutor General for hate offenses. That was to add another layer of checks and balances to reassure people who were concerned that this measure could be used wrongly, so that any old person could get up one day and launch a prosecution. Removing the religious exemption from the criminal code doesn't mean that it would be easy to do. There would be another layer of checks and balances. So even though in Quebec we have our own methods, this guarantee would apply to all of Canada. And so I think it would strengthen religious freedom of expression. And another key part of everything that happened at committee with the Conservatives, well, of course, it was the removal of the religious exemption for this offense. Of course, it's okay to be religious, to practice a religion, to have faith in your life and to support that faith in every aspect of your life. Of course, that's fine. We've always respected that. It's a basic right. And the Bloc Québécois will never attack that right, despite what the Conservatives were saying at their three-ring circus at committee. And every religion says that it's a religion of peace and love. Every religion says that. No religion says we want to promote hate speech and violence. And again, I would remind you all to pay close attention to what my colleague from Mirabel is going to say. I'm sure he's going to have an interesting point of view. But in any case, I've never heard of a religion that didn't call itself a religion of love. So with that in mind, if someone practices a faith, then why would they not agree with the idea that we are trying to remove the option of using religious beliefs as an excuse for hate speech and asking or promoting violence against a specific group? Let's recall the case of Adil Sharkawi, who was calling for Zionist Jews to be exterminated. And he made that speech in downtown Montreal. We often recall that example. Well, it was abominable that he was able to use his religion as an excuse for such remarks. I personally don't know anyone who believed that we should keep these protections in place and allow our priests, imams, and rabbis to allow them to call for the extermination of a specific group in society on the basis of a religious text. I don't think anyone is saying that's a good idea. So the Conservatives are manipulating the facts. It's frankly shameful and odious. A few years ago, the Bloc Québécois brought in a motion to abolish the religious exemption. This was long before C-9. This goes back a long way because it's a matter of Quebec values. At the time, a Conservative member spoke to me in a corridor, in a hallway, and said that they wanted to hear more about that idea. And so I said, well, it's simply that we don't want to be able to have people calling for violence and hate and then saying, well, this is on the basis of my faith. It doesn't mean that you can't cite a religious text. Of course, you can. And some texts, in some cases, when we look at them with our modern eyes, may seem very violent or inappropriate, but we can do that without calling for hate.
The goal is simply to not allow any refuge for somebody calling for hate under the criminal code. And the Conservative member said, listen, I don't agree with that, because if my pastor wants to speak out against homosexuals, but he can't because of this, change. And I fell off my chair, Madam Speaker, and that's what I said. I said, listen, are you telling me that your pastor might call on his flock to perpetuate acts of violence against the LGBTQ community because of a religious text. And the member said, well, listen, they have to have that right. And I would say, what priest would call upon their flock to commit acts of violence or to mobilize against any particular community? You change your priest. That's what I said to him. You got to change your religion. You got to change your priest. Find another messenger, because that messenger is broken. So, with everything we've seen in committee and with the Conservatives filibustering, we've all understood here that they're probably going to make a huge amount of money off of this through fundraising. I'm sure that colleagues have seen dozens and dozens of colleagues come in. I've seen emails come in from across Canada calling us to not make changes to this part of the criminal code. I'm sure the Conservatives made a huge amount of money off of this. I'm sure it was fun for them to have the money keep coming in. But you know what? There comes a time when it has to stop. When we see spectacles where there are members with Bibles in their hands bashing the Bloc Québécois in committee, Madam Speaker. Well, you know what? It's time for that to stop. The parliamentary process and democracy have to be able to move forward, as my colleague said earlier. So there comes a point where we have to work. We have to move forward. And, we can agree or disagree on certain things, but listen, at the end of the day, you have to realize that, filibustering doesn't get you anywhere. And, we need to move forward. So, sometimes you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think there are people among those members who truly believe that abolishing the religious exemption is an attack on their fundamental rights to practice their religion. Maybe there's some who truly believe that. But I'd like to know, what's worse, Madam Speaker? Is it worse to be a federal member and not be able to understand the scope of an amendment like this block amendment? Or to perfectly understand the amendment, but abuse the trust of their voters by leading them to believe that it's going to restrict their religious freedom? I don't know what's worse between being incompetent or between bad behavior. And I think there's a very a thin line here, Madam Speaker. So as my colleague was saying earlier, there comes a point when yes, it's all right to be a little bit sensational from time to time, but disinformation doesn't have its place, and certainly manipulating facts and truth doesn't have its place here. I think it's time for this to end, and that's why the Bloc Québécois supports this motion, which will restrict debate and allow us to move on so that we can make this parliament work and talk about other important subjects. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Hamilton.
Lancaster Dundas.
Lancaster Dundas. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I apologize, my question isn't in French, but I really appreciated the speech from the member opposite. The Combating Hate Act was developed in close consultation with impacted communities, with faith communities, with police across Canada. And I think he made some really important points that the show and performance that we're seeing from the members opposite is extremely unfortunate. I really question the motivation of what they're doing. And I would like the member opposite to maybe comment on what he sees as the damage of this performance, of building this up to be something that it's not, in a purely cynical way to fundraise and gain followers, likes, clicks, and subscriptions. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Drummond. Well, it's not the first time, and I thank my colleague for the question, Madam Speaker. It's not the first time that we've seen these actions from the Conservatives. We saw it with Bill C-11. Once again, facts were deformed. They called that bill an attack on freedom of expression, which was not the case, and it was neither the case nor the intention of that bill. So the impact that this has, and to answer part of my colleague's question, is that it adds to cynicism for Quebecers and Canadians towards our system, towards Parliament, and towards the work that we do. It's all right to disagree with things, and it's all right to share a point of view, obviously, and of course, it's good to debate that. But there comes a time when, it can't become disinformation and manipulation of facts for partisan reasons. Thank you.
Brandon Souris.
Souris Mousmount.
Oh, Souris Mousmount.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The member, he accused the Conservatives of being cynical and spreading misinformation and disinformation and about the religious exemption. How can he say that after the minister himself said at committee that pastors who cite the Bible should be charged criminally? This is exactly why the Conservatives are against this motion or against this, because we don't trust the Liberals to be the arbiter of our thoughts, of our decisions, what we believe in. How can he square that circle?
The honourable member for Drummond. Madam Speaker, I don't have the specific quote from the minister in front of me, but I would be very surprised that a minister would say in committee that a pastor who quotes a passage from the Bible could be charged criminally. I don't see in what kind of medieval world something like that would have been said. So I won't answer because I don't have all the facts. And when I don't have the facts, you know what I do, Madam Speaker? I inform myself before I speak out. Thank you.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my dear colleague, the member for Drummond. I have a lot of concerns about Bill C-9. But that's not the subject today. But I do have a problem with the idea that it's so important that we have motions like this to study a bill very quickly. For me, the problem is with another part of Bill C-9, which is to say that in a protest, it's possible to break the law because one is not respecting a certain distance between the protest and another building, that somebody might have no idea that that's the case. What does the member think about that aspect of the problems with C-9? The honourable member for Drummond. Well, Madam Speaker, I didn't fully understand the meaning of the question, but what I would say is that in this bill, there's an opportunity for parliamentarians to have debates, to discuss things and to make amendments, which wasn't able to be done because of Conservative filibustering at committee. But there are always protections in a bill. There are always protections which are there. There are always ways to, if we note that a bill goes too far relative to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, for example, there are protections that exist in every circumstance. And so that's what I would say to my colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands. A very brief question, the honourable member for Mirabel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's a strong consensus in Quebec in favour of this amendment. In Quebec, it's a strong amendment against the use of this exemption for hate speech. But what I'm seeing from the Conservatives today is people from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the West, the radical religious right wing of the Conservative Party. Why does my colleague think that Conservative members from Quebec are embarrassed to speak out on this? The honourable member for Drummond in 10 seconds. Well, I have the great privilege of sitting as a block member, Madam Speaker, so I don't have that dilemma. But if I was in a party that had members from across Canada that has to satisfy all Canadians, if there was a question like this on the floor today, there were certainly a strong chance that I would also be hiding in the curtains myself today. Resuming debate, the honourable member from Mirabel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you walk into a city to attack someone, you suggest that they shouldn't attack you. And then if you walk in and say, listen, you're going to become slaves. But if that doesn't work, you're going to have to lay siege to the city. And if that doesn't work, you'll have to attack everyone by the sword. But you can reserve the women, the children, and everything you'll find in the city. And you'll be able to use everything you take from your enemies, and God will protect you. And you can continue to do this in all cities that are not part of the country where you will live. In terms of cities from these people, which the eternal God gives you, you don't have to let a single soul survive. You can exterminate everyone to send the Hittites, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, and others, as your eternal God has ordered you to do, so that they don't teach you to follow the abominable practices with which they honor false gods, and which would lead you to sin against your God, Madam Speaker. And when you attack a city and you're forced to extend the siege before you can take that city, do not attack the fruit trees around it. No, you can't. Don't hurt the trees. You can eat the fruit, but you won't cut down the fruit trees, because The fruit tree is not a man, so you should not treat that tree like you would somebody that you are laying siege to. However, if it's not a fruit tree, you can cut it down and use it to lay siege to the city until it succumbs, Madam Speaker. So I finished the quote. And, you know, I was raised in a very religious family, Madam Speaker. My two parents were theologians. So that's chapter 20 of Deuteronomy, which is one of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's also referred to in the Quran, Madam Speaker. And that reminds us of one thing, Madam Speaker. It's that most religious texts, Madam Speaker, are texts that were written in pre-medieval times. They were written by humans at a time when massacring religious or cultural opponents was the norm. Leaders at the time added moral suggestions that met their needs. And that was the case for the 3 Hebraic religions at the time. Does that mean that we don't have the right to read them? Listen, I've just read that section to you for pedagogical reason. Am I going to be sent to prison? No. Did I commit a crime? No, Madam Speaker. Why? Because I just wanted to reassure you that I don't know any Hittites or Canaanites. I don't know any Phoenicians either. But I know that certain forms of interpretation and certain ways of reading these texts in the hands of malintentioned priests can lead to the committing of a crime. And if I was a believer, Madam Speaker, and if I thought that there was, historic value to these texts, the last thing that I would want is for them to be used by malintentioned persons. But something is certain, Madam Speaker, is that these texts can be used for that reason. They can be used for that reason. And when you read this, the last thing you want to do is, go out and spread love, after you've read that speech. So religions have evolved, and most religious texts are texts that have not been amended the way that we want to amend our laws with C-9. And with the amendments to C-9 and the way that they are written, with the protections that are included in the amendments, with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that governs C-9, and with the jurisprudence that already exists, the case law, which calls on us to adapt these amendments to clarify the law, we are protecting religious speech. We're protecting religious values. We're protecting peace. We're protecting love, Madam Speaker. And we're protecting the right, we're protecting the best of religions while preventing certain people from using that religion for the wrong reasons. And so that's what's in Bill C-9, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I'll say something. There's a reason why we're talking about Bill C-9. And there's a reason why the Conservatives who are making noise across the House, listen, I've listened to them. I'm a respectful person most of the time, and I've listened to what they've had to say. And I'd like to say to them that hate crimes, and nobody has a monopoly on hate crimes. Hate crimes, we've had 1,284 hate crimes targeting religious groups. That was in 2024. And that was up compared to 2022. And each one of those crimes, listen, they weren't necessarily caused by the words of a priest or religious leader, but those crimes are attacks on religious freedom, on people's right to go to their mosque, to their synagogue, or to their church. Those crimes are also attacks on freedom of religion, and much more serious than what the Conservatives are alleging with C-9. And I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned to see this increase in 45% in recent years in hate crimes. And it's explained by the increase in hate crimes declared by the police targeting the Jewish population. That's up by 71%, and Muslims up by 94%, Madam Speaker. And that's what we have to fight, Madam Speaker. So what does the bill do? Well, the Conservatives, and listen, we have to remind them that, what we have before us is a time allocation motion. Earlier, they said, we haven't seen enough witnesses, and that's why we're wasting everyone's time and going to, 2 in the morning at committee. Listen, I have watched the Justice Committee, and the member for Rivière-du-Nord asked the question about the religious exemption to every witness who came before a committee on this issue. There were people who agreed and there were people who disagreed, but the question was asked by the member for Rivière-du-Nord to every witness. And listen, when you're spreading misinformation, that's not debate. When you're wasting time, that's not debate. So what does the bill do? It reestablishes consent of the Attorney General to allow prosecution for hate crime. It respects case fly. It abolishes the religious exemption from the criminal code for hate crimes. And if you read the clause, it does not prevent anyone, Madam Speaker, from reading or teaching religious texts, which they can do with full freedom. Now, it's not normal to hide behind one particular clause of the criminal code to be able to commit crimes. And if I was somebody who was profoundly religious, the last thing that I would want is to be associated with somebody who uses and instrumentalizes religion to commit crimes. In 2017, Madam Speaker, we know the case of Adil Sharkawi in Quebec, and that's why there's a consensus in Quebec for the kind of amendment that we proposed for C-9. There's a consensus, and that's why the conservative Quebecers are hiding in the third basement right now. In 2017, somebody said that Jews were the worst part of humanity and they needed to be massacred on Judgment Day. And, you know, in 2024, in Port Coquitlam, there was a call to the death of Jews and Christians. Now, that's not love, Madam Speaker, you know. Or in 2024, October 2024, Adil Sharkawi called for death to Jews in his prayer, Madam Speaker, at an event. And listen, he would have been good, at finding tax loopholes, this guy. And they weren't able to, move forward with the criminal charges because of the religious exemption. Calvin Robinson was defrocked by the Anglican Church after making a Nazi salute in a pro-life rally. And there was a religious leader who wasn't allowed to come into Canada, thanks, among others, to the efforts of the Bloc Québécois, because there were plans for a conference that would have incited hate, Madam Speaker. This is somebody who was going to suggest that people of the LGBT community didn't have the right to live, Madam Speaker. So these are crimes, and these actions and these words need to be treated as crimes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Questions and comments?
For Elgin St. Thomas, London South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I must commend the Bloc Québécois for so successfully enlisting the Liberal government in their assault on religious freedom in this country. I know the Bloc has long tried to do what Bill C-9 now does, and, good on them for getting the Liberals on board. But my colleague from the Bloc Québécois just once again misrepresented the facts of the Adil Sharkawi case to justify removing the religious defense. So my question to my colleague is this: will he acknowledge that the religious defense does not and has never applied to criminal code provisions dealing with violence or the threat of violence, and acknowledge that prosecutors did not invoke the existence of the religious defense when not proceeding with charges against Mr. Sharkawi? Will he clear the record and stop misrepresenting the record?
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Mirabel. Well, Madam Speaker, listen, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the list of cases that I gave you, these are obvious cases where the supposed freedom of religion has been used to commit crimes, calling for murder, calling for hate, calling for further hate. And in Quebec, after consulting internal lawyers if the prosecution decided to go one way or another. Well, that doesn't change anything. What do the Conservatives expect? Are they waiting for them to be major, 2, 3, 4 major crimes that are being committed so that there's more hate, Madam Speaker, so there's more attacks on mosques, more attacks on synagogues, Madam Speaker? And these are amendments that make sense, that respect case law, and this is exactly what we're doing.
Commentaire question come the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate many of the members' comments, and I'm wondering if you could highlight what we often hear about is the hate crimes that get publicized. There are literally thousands of hate crimes that take place in Canada, Madam Speaker. And if he could just provide his thoughts in regards to that aspect and why it's so important that we have legislation of this nature.
The honourable member for Mirabel. Well, there's a mathematical reality in crime statistics. The statistics we read always to do with the minimum. It's what is actually declared. For sexual offenses, when we were first hearing about this, the number of complaints increased because all of a sudden victims felt heard. So how many people may have been exposed to situations where they never complained formally, where there was social coercion? We don't know, Madam Speaker, but we know one thing, that statistics are alarming with respect to hate crimes that are linked to religion, and we need to make Canadians and Quebecers aware of the situation.
The commentaire? Comments, l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Drummond. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my colleague from Mirabel for his thoughtful and also entertaining speech, mostly his very relevant speech. In response to what the Conservatives are saying, Adil Sharkawi and the charges that were not laid, can my colleague from Mirabel tell me whether the Public Prosecution Service or the prosecutors usually table reasons why they don't file charges if they tend to refer to criminal code offenses specifically when they make a decision? Madam Speaker, I am not a legal scholar, but I think the Crown always has a strategy. And when charges are laid, or when they don't lay charges, they use the most successful strategy possible to lead to a conviction. We, Madam Speaker, are legislators. We understand this is a hate crime, hate speech based on religious texts. So let's say there is a prayer during a protest to hide behind the law. I'm convinced that's the purpose of it. A couple of weeks ago, I was protesting against the high-speed rail, Alto, and everything that was happening in my riding. And we weren't hiding behind a prayer. I think the intent behind Adil Sharkawi was to use this particular protection within the criminal code to be able to go much further than any regular citizen could go. And that's what we need to look at as legislators, the intent, people's intentions.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And if I may, just to start off by making it very, very clear, I truly believe, as I know my colleagues believe, that no one in Canadian society should feel unsafe because of who they are. And when you take a look at Bill C-9, Madam Speaker, Bill C-9 deals with a critically important issue, an issue in which was raised in the last federal election, and it was a commitment that today's Prime Minister made to Canadians less than a year ago, dealing with the issue of hate crime to provide and come forth with legislation that will actually have a real and tangible impact. The question I just posed to the member from the bloc, Madam Speaker, we are all aware of many horrific hate-motivated crimes that have taken place in Canada. Many of them get publicized to the nth degree. But there is a whole lot more that takes place that we never, ever hear about. I do believe the passage of Bill C-9 is going to raise the profile of the issue in a positive manner, Madam Speaker. There's two things that I'd like to kind of maybe divide out in terms of the debate in the next 18 minutes or so that I have to speak on it. First of all, it's to deal with the motion that we have before us and the purpose of the motion. And then the second is to deal with Bill C-9 itself. So we have before us legislation, or a motion, I should say, that's going to ensure that this legislation actually gets voted upon. Because even though we have a minority number of members of parliament in the House, we believe we have a majority of MPs that clearly support Bill C-9. Our problem is, Madam Speaker, that you have the Conservative Party of Canada that has made the decision at all costs to prevent the legislation from passing, Madam Speaker. And I've said in the past, you give me any grouping of 12 students that go to a public high school in Canada, I would be able to put up a filibuster that would be able to prevent legislation from passing unless a government is able to bring in some form of time allocation. So it's not because they are outstanding parliamentarians that they're able to frustrate the system, but rather there's a motivation within the Conservative Party that does not want to see the legislation passed. And as they say, well, some say here, another one says free speech. Let me add something else to it. The Conservative Party of Canada is more interested. They are more interested in the Conservative Party of Canada and what's happening internally within their party than what's in the interest of Canadians. And I say that, Madam Speaker, and allow me to expand on that. Because when you think of Bill C-9, there is a great deal of misinformation that is out there. A great deal. And a lot of that misinformation is rooted into the Conservative Caucus of Canada, the official opposition, Madam Speaker. And they say, well, let me clearly demonstrate some of that. I don't know how it is, but I get fundraising and emails from the Conservative Party of Canada. They can take me off the list, and I've said it before, take me off the list whenever you want. But let me read a couple of emails, Madam Speaker, and this is why it's really, really important. Because I believe that the motivating factor for the Conservative Party, there is a bit of a split. You got the far right, you have the others, and many others within the Conservative Party will be quiet on the issue because of the leadership of the Conservative Party. And what is the motivation? In good part, it's about building up a data bank and raising money. That is a real issue for the Conservative Party. They see Bill C-9 as a way in which they can promote fear, spread misinformation, and raise money. Let me quote from a couple of emails. This is what the Conservative Party of Canada has sent out to thousands of Canadians. And I quote, Kevin, the Liberals are waging a war on religious freedom. Their goal is to expose people of faith to criminal prosecution for a simple act of quoting their own sacred texts. These attacks of freedom of expression and freedom of religion are shocking and completely unacceptable. This must be stopped at once. As the far right in the Conservative caucus applauds the comment. Sure, they're the author of the letter, Madam Speaker. Conservatives will fight tooth and nail to stop this reckless and unprecedented attack on our freedoms and defend the Canadian Charter of Rights. What a joke. This is actually ridiculous, Madam Speaker. What is the purpose of sending this out? Well, you know, if you could read the back, I got to keep it down, Madam Speaker. I don't want to be accused of a prop, but I can tell you it's all about raising money. So they're sending out thousands of emails across the country, spreading misinformation and fear in order to raise money. That's what that email is, and that's coming from the Conservative Party. Another email. The Liberals and Bloc want to prosecute people from quoting scripture. They are trying to push laws that could criminalize passages from the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, and other sacred texts. On this one, Madam Speaker, they're not looking for money, but rather they're building a data bank, Madam Speaker. So you wonder why it is that you see we finally got it through second reading, and we get it to committee, and now and that was months ago, and we continue to see the Conservative Party filibustering at committee stage, Madam Speaker. Because they do not want to see this legislation pass, even though the essence of the legislation is sound and it will make a difference, and it was a part of an election platform from Canada's new Prime Minister and 300 plus Liberal candidates from coast to coast to coast, Madam Speaker, dealing with the issue of crime. I'm not surprised. You know, we have a substantial legislative agenda dealing with crime. If the Conservatives would only recognize what it is that Canadians, conservative ridings are even hearing, I would suggest, Madam Speaker, and that is people want to see legislation, they want to see action, they want to see a cooperation on the floor of the House of Commons and its standing committees so that we can pass and make good, sound public policy. And that is what Bill C-9 is, Madam Speaker. But it's not alone. This bill, we finally got the okay by getting an opposition party, in particular the Bloc, on side that it will allow the minority Liberal government, our government, to ultimately get it through committee and ultimately pass law, to become law. If we did not do that, Madam Speaker, all you have to do is just read the propaganda that comes out of the Conservative caucus and listen to what they say inside the House here or inside committee, and you'll understand they have no intentions on passing it. So then if we say, well, here we have a motion before us that guarantees its passage, well, then they try to link it to democracy and freedoms and so forth, Madam Speaker. I can tell you, I sat in opposition for over 20 years. And there is a time that you have to really reflect in terms of just how effective you are being and question the motivations even within your own leadership. The leadership of the Conservative Party today is an absolute disaster, Madam Speaker. Because when we see good, sound public policy to deal with issues that Canadians want us to be dealing with, and we continue to see the type of filibustering that we see in the coming from the Conservative Party, I say shame. Shame on the Conservatives that continue to promote that type of behavior, Madam Speaker. Don't try to say it's we're, as a government, trying to be anti-democratic. I stood in my place, as I've highlighted before, Madam Speaker. I've asked for leave of the House to be able to sit till midnight for weeks, and it's the Conservatives that say no to that, Madam Speaker. Even though they'll say, well, we want more time, when they're provided more time, what do they say? No, because it means they have to put in a bit of extra work, Madam Speaker. So they talk about, yes, we want to be able to debate things. That's not the reality, Madam Speaker. The reality is they want to use the argument in order to justify their poor behavior on delivering for Canadians. They have to be dragged kicking and screaming for us to actually get Bill C-14 bail reform legislation through the House. They have to be shamed into doing it, Madam Speaker. 17. Reflect in terms of what's happening on Bill C-2. They cry about certain issues, but when it comes time to actually do something like pass legislation, want to filibuster it. Take a look in terms of what's happening with Bill C-2. Again, it's an absolute dead end. Why? Because you have the official opposition, the Conservative Party, that's made the determination that they don't want to deliver for Canadians. They want to deliver for the Conservative Party and the Conservative Party alone, Madam Speaker. And that's what their motivation is. Take a look at some of the substance of the bill itself. If I could get off the motion and look in terms of what it is that Bill C-9 does. There is some substantial changes that are being proposed in it. Think in terms, Madam Speaker, of obstruction and intimidation that is used in order to prevent individuals from having access. They talk about religious freedom. Well, what about having the freedom to be able to go unimpeded in order to a church, a mosque, a synagogue?
It's already criminal.
And they don't understand it, Madam Speaker.
Yeah, I understand it. It's assault.
You know, this is a stand-alone hate offenses that we are creating. These are offenses, Madam Speaker.
I interrupt the honourable member. All members will have the opportunity to speak when the time for questions comes. Let us allow the honourable member to finish his speech. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, Madam Speaker. So let's take a look in terms of that aspect of the legislation that enables people to have a higher sense of comfort in knowing that you cannot be denied that opportunity to practice your faith without having to worry about issues of intimidation and obstruction. You know, blocking an entrance to a church or a mosque or a synagogue, Madam Speaker. And having a standalone hate offense, I believe, is a positive thing. You know, take a look in terms of a standalone, again, hate-motivated offense dealing with, for example, assaulting someone because of who they are. That's why I started off my comments by talking about that no one should feel unsafe because of who they are. This legislation deals with that particular issue, Madam Speaker. It is substantive. It means a great deal. Then you have the concerns that say, well, you know what? We want to stick to the issue of being able to quote religion, scriptures, from whatever faith it might be. You know, I stood on this in second reading, and I actually quoted from the Charter of Rights. Remember one of the emails that I read out, Madam Speaker? They tried to say that they're the defenders of the Charter of Rights. It was the Liberal Party, a government years ago, that actually brought in the Canadian Charter of Rights. We are a party of the Charter of Rights. And if you look at the beginning of the Charter of Rights, it guarantees religious freedoms, Madam Speakers. It's in our charter. Show me a court ruling that is actually a Supreme Court ruling that is actually not allowed what it is that every member or many members of the Conservative Party are telling people that it's going to change. Show me something that a pastor or a leader within a church, a mosque, or a synagogue, Madam Speaker. And of course, they're not going to be able to do that, Madam Speaker. Because at the end of the day, when you listen to what they're saying, you get this sense that if someone belongs to a Bible club or they want to sit around in a small group and talk about their faith, that they could end up going to jail. Someone says across the way, yes, they could. Madam Speaker, that is absolutely ridiculous. And this is a type of propaganda that we get coming from the Conservative Party, Madam Speaker. And I would suggest to you, you know, they talk about like the chamber. It's only a faction within the Conservative Party. I like to believe it's not, at least I hope, it's not all of the Conservative Party. but a majority of the members of Parliament here in Ottawa today, in a minority government, a majority of MPs want to see this legislation ultimately pass through. And that's indeed, Madam Speaker, what it is that's being proposed here before us today. Recognizing the value, the importance of the legislation, and saying to the Conservative Party, enough is enough already. We finally have an opposition party that is actually on side and prepared to see this bill ultimately become law, Madam Speaker. And I would suggest to you, Madam Speaker, in many ways, there is other pieces of legislation that are there. Extortion, as an example, is a very serious issue. It is a serious issue, whether it's for the Prime Minister or, I can tell you, every Liberal member of caucus. You know, the police, law enforcement agencies, security agencies of Canada, they want to have lawful access. They're asking for lawful access. Do you know, Madam Speaker, we could actually have lawful access today, but that's just another example of the filibustering that takes place in the Conservative Party today, not wanting to see legislation pass. So if you're serious, if you are serious about the issue of extortion, then why would you not allow for lawful access to become a part of the Canadian law? And for those from the far right, let me suggest to you that you have all forms of stakeholders that agree to it. Just like when they point out, the Conservative Party says, well, you know, this is our primary concern. You know, the Minister of Justice, in introducing the legislation, made reference to the fact that we want to work with members. This is a serious issue. We want to work with members. And ultimately, Madam Speaker, there was a great deal of consultation. Yes, there was concerns that were raised by faith communities. The minister met with representatives of the different faiths, Madam Speaker, and more. And ultimately, that led to an amendment that's being proposed by the government in committee, Madam Speaker. No, true. So what happens now is there it sits in committee, and yet we still see a Conservatives wanting to continue the filibuster, even though there's a general consensus that we are moving forward, even in addressing the issues that have been raised, Madam Speaker. True to form in terms of what it is that the Justice Minister has indicated from the beginning of the debate. That if there's ways in which we can improve the legislation, we're prepared to do that. But it's time that the Conservatives need to realize that we shouldn't have to bring in legislation or motions of this nature in order to pass legislation that is in the good and public best interest. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson Nicola.
It's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson Nicola. And the moment we stop discussing, the moment we stop debating, the moment that this place is not where we have difficult conversations is the moment that we might as well pack it in. Now, to listen to that member, you would think that it is offensive that Conservatives and Canadians even question this. I will invite him to my riding, and I'd actually like him to address this, to meet with faith-based leaders, to talk about these things, because I have met with faith leaders, as have so many of my colleagues. Will he take me up on that? If he says nobody's opposed, come to my riding and let's talk about it so he can hear the real world fear that people have about this bill. Will he do it? Yes or no? I'll even pay it.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, you know, I've had the opportunity to challenge Conservative members to have debates in different areas. I would be more than happy to be able to have a debate inside Winnipeg on this and the issue of Conservatives and how they filibuster the crime agenda, and that would include this. I would suggest to you, Madam Speaker. I look forward to the member opposite in accepting that challenge. Be happy to work with the member and make the arrangements necessary in Winnipeg where we can have that debate. I can assure him there are many people of faith in Winnipeg too.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Beauharnois.
The honorable member for Beauharnois, Salaberry, Soulanges, Huntington. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like our colleague across the way to clearly explain why today we are debating motion 6. What is the point of that? And why have we gotten to this stage? Why are we having to debate a time allocation motion? Perhaps there has been filibustering by the Conservatives at committee. Can my colleague speak about that?
Parlementaire.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, to the bloc's and members of the bloc's credit, they have recognized the true value of Bill C-9. They've recognized that the Minister of Justice was serious when he said that he's open to making the legislation stronger and work with whether it's opposition members or faith leaders so that we have good legislation here in Canada. And a vast majority of the members of Parliament in today's Parliament actually support us moving forward and ultimately passing the legislation. The problem is, and the reason why, get right to the question, the reason why we're having this debate on on the motion 6, Madam Speaker, is because the Conservatives have absolutely made it a mission of theirs to continue to raise more money, spread more misinformation, and prevent Bill C-9 from passing. So the only way we can get it passed is if we have support from some opposition members. And I appreciate that the Bloc has stepped up to the plate.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the honourable leader, deputy leader of the government of the House, as I come to my feet today on this legislation and on the programming motion, it just has to be said that we're shaken to our core and as Greens, horrified by acts of violence directed at synagogues just within the last day or two in Toronto. And we're debating legislation and wondering, would it make things better? I don't know, because I agree with civil liberties reviews of this legislation that the definitions around motivated crimes against places of worship are so indistinct that it could end up criminalizing legal protest. But I ask the honourable member to please reconsider the nature of this government's attempt over and over again to bulldoze things through this place without adequate study.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. With the exception of maybe that last statement, I'm kind of in concurrence with the leader of the Green Party. Having said that, if we were to do what it is that the leader of the Conservative Green Party is saying, we wouldn't be able to pass any legislation, Madam Speaker. We wouldn't be able to pass legislation. Bill C-9 would die. There's no reason why Bill C-9 couldn't have passed at the end of last year, Madam Speaker. We could have passed it. It could be the law today. The reason why is because the Conservative Party refuses in many ways to pass legislation. And ironically, then they'll go out in the media and they'll say, well, the Liberals can't pass their own legislation. They can't deal with their own legislative agenda. Well, duh. Look in the mirror, my Conservative friends. And if you want to do what's in the interest of Canadians as a whole and the public interest, as opposed to the Conservative Party's best interests, I believe you'll recognize the value of legislation and at least allow it to come to votes. It doesn't take much to filibuster legislation, and that's what we've witnessed day in and day out coming from the Conservative Party of Canada, sadly.
Sarnia Lambton Bequesnon.
Madam Speaker. It's already illegal, Madam Speaker, to intimidate or harass people on their way into worship or to death threat the Jews, for example, but none of these laws are being enforced. 30 million people of faith in this country have expressed concern about the amendment that the Liberals are going to make with the Bloc to remove the religious exemption, and they know that the amendment that the Liberals have proposed does nothing to actually address people being able to freely read Scripture. So why does this government not care what 30 million people of faith in this country think?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I do care about what they think, and that's one of the reasons I have to dispel many of the untruths that are put out through social media that come right from the Conservative Party of Canada. But you know, at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, I suspect that once all the filibustering comes to an end, and it will because of this motion, my best guess is there's going to be a lot of Conservatives voting in favor of the legislation. We'll have to wait and see. Remember what happened with C-14? For weeks, the Conservatives were the only entity, in all likelihood, well, maybe some of the criminals, the only entity in Canada that were actually opposing passing through Bill C-14. And we finally shamed them into allowing it to pass, Madam Speaker. And when it actually came to a final reading, I don't think any Conservative voted against it.
You're welcome. Questions and comments. Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Fulton West and Castor Dundas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm listening closely to this discussion this morning on the Combating Hate Act here in the House of Commons. I have to say the comments and the approach and the talking points from the Conservative members are absolutely shameful. From the countrywide circus, the show that they're putting on, the mobilization of communities of faith, the division and hatred. Madam Speaker, my question to the member is, what I'm seeing here is the mega wing of the Conservative Party of Canada. And on the heels of shootings at synagogues in Ontario, on the phone this weekend with members from my community asking, when is the Combating Hate Act going to be passed? That is what this is about. This discussion from the members opposite is absolutely shameful. Have they no shame? Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, that's a tough question. Maybe the best way for me to answer that would be to recognize who the Conservative Party is today and contrast that to a progressive, underline the word progressive, Conservative Prime Minister of Joe Clark. And Joe Clark had indicated that he never left the party, that the Conservatives left him, in essence. And what we have witnessed through the current leadership of the Conservative Party is that there is a very far-right conservative attitude. We've already seen that in some of the comments this morning, Madam Speaker, in some of the propaganda that they pump out. It is indeed a far-right Conservative Party to the degree in which there are many progressive Conservative voters in the past that are now coming over to support different political entities because of how far the Conservative Party today has shifted to the right.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for, St. Elgin and oh my God, Elgin St. Andrews, London West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciated the Parliamentary Secretary's reminiscing about political parties of yore, and I wonder where the Liberals that used to stand up for free speech are. But my question for the Parliamentary Secretary, who claimed that Canadians gave them a mandate for this legislation, is where they ever said to Canadians that they would be removing long-standing protections for religious speech. Because earlier on, I asked the Parliamentary Secretary if she agreed with the Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture that prosecutors should be able to charge people for quoting certain scriptures. And she wouldn't give an answer. So does he agree with that minister that certain scriptures should be illegal to quote? Because that wasn't in the Liberal platform.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, upon reflections, it was the Liberal Party of Pierre Elliott Trudeau that brought in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Within the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, it is very clear in terms of the freedom of religion and to practice it. We are not going to be sending people or censoring people that are sitting in a Bible club or practicing their faith, Madam Speaker. It is absolutely ridiculous, the arguments that the Conservative Party has brought to the floor on Bill C-9, and I would ultimately argue that they're being motivated in order to raise money as opposed to protect the interests of Canadians. Hate crime is a serious issue. This government is going to deal with.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for York Centre.
The guillotine, the hammer, that's generally how these motions are referred to. When the government shuts down debate, shuts down speech, and ironically on a bill that deals with speech and on an issue of free speech. The Liberals say that they have enough hearings on C-9. There's been a lot of talk between politicians on Bill C-9, but the Liberals refuse to hear from witnesses, refuse to hear from Canadians. I want to tell Canadians, not just about Bill C-9, but what the Liberals did to shove this terrible piece of legislation down our throats to the point that today they have to drop the nuclear bomb to stop me from doing my job on the Justice Committee. We've heard from a handful of witnesses on one of the most consequential pieces of legislation that this Parliament will take up. We were supposed to hear from Dave Brith. We were supposed to hear from Simon Wiesenthal, who were scheduled to testify. But the former head of the committee suspended witness hearings before they were able to testify and ordered the committee to proceed to clause by clause. I had witnesses calling me personally. I had the Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism call me. I had Imam Tawhidi call me and say, Roman, why am I not permitted to testify on this piece of legislation? The former cabinet, the former committee chair, the same committee chair that asked, how is it that certain scripture cannot be hate speech, is the very same committee chair that refused to hear from multiple witnesses who wanted to make submissions on this piece of legislation even before amendments. So we proceeded to consideration of Bill C-9, clause by clause, and Speaker, I was there. I had a front row seat to all of it. We were working in good faith. I worked with my Liberal colleague from Mount Royal. We actually agreed to fit the definition of hate speech. My concern with respect to the removal of the consent of the Attorney General, that was also dealt with. And even better, I was surprised to see in the proposed amendments that my private member's bill, Bill 257, against the willful promotion of terrorism, made it into one form or another into the proposed amendments by the Liberals. That was one of the best days of my career. We could have actually potentially fixed this bill. And then, all of a sudden, I learned about this in the media. The Liberals did not have the courage to tell us what they're doing. I had to learn about the Bloc amendment from the news media. That the Liberals and the Bloc agreed to amendments which would remove the religious defense to hate speech from the criminal code. That the entire exercise was a fiasco. But this amendment that the Bloc passed with their Liberal friends is predicated on false pretenses. The Bloc is saying that moving this amendment, that people should not be able to hide behind a religious exemption to hate speech. But that is because we know that there was an imam in Montreal named Sharkawi who called for the extermination of the enemies of Gaza. And the Bloc is saying that because he wasn't prosecuted, we need to remove this religious exemption. But that's just not true. To avail yourself of the religious exemption, the words that you utter need to be in good faith. When you call for the extermination of people, that's not in good faith, Mr. Speaker. And second, look at the law. The defense, the religious defense, does not apply to incitement. It applies to the second category of hate speech, which is willful promotion of hatred. But you cannot hide behind the religious defense when you're inciting to violence. Incitement is not protected. I read the statement of in committee from the Quebec prosecutors who said they did not lay charges against Sharkawi, not because of the religious defense, but because enemies of Gaza was not an identifiable group of people. So apparently you can call for their extermination, according to the Quebec prosecution. But it has nothing to do with this amendment or this religious defense. The Bloc know this, the Liberals know that. This is a charade, and I'll be splitting my time. Thank you, Speaker.
The honourable member will have 5 minutes and 12 seconds remaining after a question period. Statements by members, déclarations de députés. The honourable member for Burnaby Central.
Mr. Speaker,
Hi, folks. MP Garnet Genis just cutting in here as the debate concludes for now on this Liberal motion to limit debate, to end debate on Bill C-9. So now it's 2 o'clock here in Ottawa. Parliament now proceeds to a different item, which is statements by members, followed by question period, which happens at 2:15. And then we're expecting that the government will call a different item for debate after question period when around 3 o'clock. So we've just had 2 hours of debate on this very draconian Liberal motion to shut down debate on Bill C-9 at committee. And you just would have heard my colleague Roman Baber, new MP from the Toronto area, who is on the Justice Committee, was speaking on it. And I think just one thing to flag is Liberals have really just missed the point on this one so badly. Anytime there's a strong public negative reaction to something they do, they'll try and say, the Conservatives are stirring up trouble, the Conservatives are confusing people or something. But that really does not respect the work, the seriousness, the concern that so many people from so many different faith communities have. And I've heard it from people in the Christian community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, many other communities who are deeply concerned about the Liberal and Bloc plan in Bill C-9 to strip away the religious defense, to create the conditions in which a person could be charged with hate speech simply for reading a religious text. So please keep an eye on this, and if you haven't already, contact your member of parliament. So these are the steps you can take. If you can follow for more updates, we'll be going live next time this motion on C-9 is debated in Parliament, but also sharing this video so people can see the speeches, can see the debate that's taken place, and contact your member of Parliament. My expectation, not 100%, but my expectation is that this motion will be the subject of closure, which means the Liberals will shut down debate on the motion to shut down debate on shutting down debate on Bill C-9, which will force a vote tomorrow night. So we're trying to get any members of other parties to see some sense on this, to understand the problem, and to vote with us against this Liberal motion. So please contact your member of Parliament as well as share this video and follow for additional updates. We're working hard here in Parliament to fight back against Liberal Bill C-9, taking away the religious defense. Liberal Bill C-9 that carries grave problems for religious freedom and freedom of speech. Thank you for being engaged and involved, and we will keep you posted on what's happening, including by live streaming from the floor of Parliament the next time this issue is up for debate.